Welcome to our 8th class on the Christian basics, or for my Lutheran teenagers, confirmation. Every week we aim to bring you biblical content that will help you in your new or emerging walk with Jesus Christ. And this week we're going to be taking a look at the Patriarchs. We're going to be going all the way from Genesis 12 to the very end of Genesis, which is a pretty long book. And so grab your seatbelt, buckle in, because we're going to be moving very fast. I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor down at First Lutheran in Houston, and let's roll. All right, just another warning that we have to move so fast to cover so much ground, and I kind of feel guilty for doing it because there's a lot that we're going to have to skip over. But in the interest of keeping these videos relatively short so that someone will actually watch them, we're going to go from Genesis 12 to 50 today, and we're looking at the Patriarchs. That is really the fathers, if you will, of the Christian faith. And the three names I want you to remember above all else today are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Genesis 12 begins with the call of Abram. It goes like this. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." This is the beginning of a promise that God makes to Abram, who would soon be called Abraham. He is to be the father of a great nation, of many, many people all over the world. And the New Testament also says this, "But if some of the branches from Abraham's tree were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches." So the nation is indeed built through Abram and his children, but through Christ, even people who are not part of these 12 tribes, what will become the 12 tribes of Israel, well, we can be grafted onto the tree as well. That's exactly what Jesus does for people like us. Now, this nation building begins with the birth of the only son of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac. And so Isaac then becomes the second of the three great patriarchs of the book of Genesis, Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob. Now, there's a really interesting story in Genesis 22, and it's a difficult story. God actually tells Abraham at this point, to sacrifice his son Isaac, to go up onto a mountain and literally kill his own son. Now, Isaac is spared by an angel at the last minute. Now, I don't think that God ever intended for Abraham to hurt Isaac, but rather it points to something else. It points to the major event of the New Testament, indeed the cross of Christ. In fact, other folks have commented on some similarities between these two stories. Check these out. In both stories, the father leads his son to be sacrificed. The son has been born with divine intervention. Abraham and Sarah were having difficulty having children. The son carried the wood or the cross to the place of sacrifice. The son was laid upon the wood and cross. In each case, the sacrifice ended up being a substitute. A ram was substituted for Isaac, and Jesus was the substitute for us. And in Genesis, the ram was caught in the thorns, but Jesus had a crown of thorns on his head. Now, Isaac would go on to have two twins who are non-identical. In fact, they look very different. Their names are Jacob and Esau. And Esau was born first, so he's the older, and ordinarily he would get all the benefits of being the older son. But Jacob is kind of a trickster. He's very crafty, and he finds a way to steal from his brother not only his birthright, but also a blessing from his father, Isaac. So it ends up being Jacob who is blessed by God. Genesis 25:23 reads this, "And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger." And again, Jacob proves to be quite crafty and really deceitful in the ways he goes about things. He's later renamed Israel, in fact, because he wrestles with God. And so he's always depicted as someone who is ultimately faithful, ultimately good, but, he never takes things lying down. Let's just put it that way. Now, Jacob has 12 sons, actually a few more than 12 sons, but he has 12 sons that are ultimately going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so, to talk about that, we really need to tell one of the greatest stories in all of the Bible. It takes place from Genesis 39 until the end of Genesis. And it's the story of one of Jacob's youngest sons, Joseph. Now, Joseph is kind of a wiseacre. His brothers don't like him very much because, well, he has these visions and he shares these visions with his brothers, and they don't come off looking too good in them. For example, Joseph has a vision that his brothers at one point will actually bow down and worship him. Well, they don't take too well to that at all. So eventually, the brothers of Joseph do what any brothers would do when they're jealous of their younger brother. They seek to kill him. Actually, they leave him for dead in a pit. And they go back home with a bloody garment, Joseph's favorite many-colored garment, and it has animal blood on it. And they say to Jacob, "Look, your son has died." And of course, Jacob mourns this terrifically. But just as it happens in the providence of God, some slave traders come along. They see Joseph down there in this pit, and they pull him out, and they end up taking him to Egypt. Well, remember, I said that Joseph had visions. Well, those visions are put to good use. He eventually ends up in the Pharaoh's good graces in Egypt because he is able to interpret dreams. One of the more famous dreams was when the Pharaoh sees 7 fat cows and then 7 skinny cows, and he doesn't know what they mean. Well, Joseph is able to discern that this is a reference to 7 years of plenty in the land, and then 7 years of famine, where the land will not produce any wheat. And so because of this, Egypt is able to prepare for those 7 years of want by storing up in the good years. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. The famine comes to the land of Egypt, and in fact, it spreads all over the world. But Egypt's okay because they have a lot of food. So guess what? Egypt ends up being kind of the breadbasket for the world at the time. And Joseph's brothers are getting very hungry, and they hear about Egypt. So guess where they go? That's right, they go back into Egypt. Well, they go into Egypt for the first time, and they run into their brother, but they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And so eventually, to make a long story short, the brothers are reconciled, and it ends up being a beautiful story of reconciliation. Joseph extends forgiveness to his brothers, and he reveals himself to them. They can't believe that he's still alive because they really did leave him for dead. But sure enough, they are able to tell Jacob, their father, that their youngest son is still alive. And because of this reunion, they are able to go into Egypt and live with Joseph, who is high up in the Egyptian government and living very well. And so now the 12 sons of Israel, remember Jacob's name was changed to Israel, the 12 sons of Israel are living in Egypt, and they prosper. And their families grow and grow and grow until eventually they become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so that's where the 12 tribes come from. Now, next week, we're going to be looking at the Exodus from Egypt, because in between the time of Joseph and the time of Moses is about 430 years. And during that time, a couple of things happened to this people of God, the Israelites. One thing is that they multiply. They're very a successful people, you might say. So there's lots and lots of them, which makes the Egyptians very nervous because all of a sudden there's more of them than there is of us, and they're getting harder to control. The other thing that happens is that the Israelites sort of fall away from their traditions. They forget about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and instead they start to worship the Egyptians' gods, and that's actually a theme you'll see in the Old Testament over and over again, forgetting the God of creation and worshiping false gods. But regardless, God sends Moses in the book of Exodus to get his people out of Egypt and eventually into the land that was promised to Abraham. But before I go, I do want to share one of the more famous quotes, and a very important quote theologically, that Joseph shares with his brothers. And they are talking about the terrible thing that happened where they sold him into slavery, but he ended up in Egypt. And he says this in Genesis 50:20. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Well, that's a wonderful statement on the providence of God and how even when people mean evil things against one another, God can use those evil acts to bring about a greater glory. Well, next time we're going to be talking about the Exodus. We're going to be looking at some historical evidence for it with my archaeologist friend, Ted Wright of Epic Archaeology. Until next time, then, you can email me anytime, christianbasicsclass@gmail.com. Check out the website, flhouston.org, for the worksheets for each video. And until next time, take care.